Good morning to everyone. If you turn your Bibles, please, to Ezekiel, the 22nd chapter. We're going to start where we left off 2 weeks ago. So I wanted to remind us that in chapter 2, Jerusalem, where God's temple was, had not yet been destroyed when Ezekiel is prophesying. It will be. And he compares them to be like dross. And the reason being is that this is going to be where you would refine all of your metals to purify them. That's what Jerusalem is going to be, a melting pot. And there will be the dross. There will be that which is purified from them. What we see is so terrifying to us because we're not used to these catastrophes. We've had a hurricane and people are astonished. When we have those, we kind of see a catastrophe and then we forget about how bad it is. And then we move on. But what we see here is that this was such a horrible thing. There'll be cannibalism. There'll be people, older people destroyed by the sword, younger people taken off into captivity. They'd already begun that in Ezekiel's day. And such a horrible thing. You read Lamentations and you see lamenting, sure, is there. But what it was discipline. It was taking away the sins of the people in the sense that they're paying for their sins. But it's cleansing them so that they would turn to Jehovah. And there would be a remnant that comes back and rebuilds the temple, and we understand that from history and from the Bible. But this is discipline. Sometimes when we're children, we think the discipline that our parents give us is too harsh. It just hurts, and that's not fair. God is fair. He's just. But the discipline here was being conquered by a foreign nation and a lot of your people killed and destroyed. And I think it's a great lesson for nations today that God can bring on destruction and we think it's so horrible and how can we ever survive that? But we're seeing in the Old Testament, that's what he did to his own people, to cleanse them, to get their heart right, as we see, give them a new spirit, as Ezekiel will tell us in later chapters. So it become dross, the fact that they're just the impurities in order to make the people more pure. And then question number 20, what did God not find to avoid the destruction of Jerusalem? He could not find a man. And yet we have Ezekiel as God's man, son of man, here in Babylonian captivity, speaking to the people who have gone into captivity. And we got Jeremiah in Jerusalem. Those are two men. And they're godly men. But there wasn't anybody to listen to their prophecies, to hear about the warnings from God, that indeed, yet they will become like dross, and their impurities have to be cleansed. As we'll see in these next two chapters, the cauldron that is full of rust. It was to purify them and to get them to realize what the consequences of idolatry is horrible in the sight of God. And so there's the fact he could not find them, so judgment was going to come. Notice in verse 30 of chapter 22, I sought for a man among them that should build up the wall, stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. He will destroy it through the Babylonian empire in Nebuchadnezzar and his army. And that's where we left off. We come to chapter 23, and we began to look at verse 21, and we said, who were Aholah and Aholabah? Who were these in chapter 22? Their names, very important names, as we shall see, and they're distinct. But who do they represent in this chapter? Okay. Samaria is the older sister. They're sisters, same mother. They're from Israel, and they were the same mother. And there was Aholah, which is going to be Samaria. Notice in verse 4, the names of them were Aholah, the elder, and Aholabah, her sister, and they became mine, and they bear sons and daughters. They belong to me. And as for their names, Samaria is Ohala, and Jerusalem is Aholabah. If you have your footnotes there, or you have a Bible that can tell you that, what's the difference between those two names as we're applying it to Samaria and Jerusalem? What does Aholah mean? Both of them deal with tents, but Samaria is her tent. Aholibah is my tent. Is Jerusalem God's tent? Is that where his tabernacle is? Is that where he would meet with the high priest and they would offer their sacrifices? It was the hub place where indeed God's presence would be there and he would be honored by the priest. That's the way it was supposed to be. But they had gone into idolatry. But no, this is my tent is in her. That's where my tabernacle is, Aholibah. That's where my glorious presence is. But you wouldn't know it the way that they are living their lives. So he uses these two names as sisters, same mother, and yet they both were very wicked. And we see how we know that from Samaria, capital city of the northern kingdom, and Jerusalem, where my tent, God says, is. Now, question number 22. How is Aholibah, that's Jerusalem, worse than her sister? I think you look at it different ways, but let's notice what the Bible says in verse 11. And her sister, Aholibah, saw this. So what had she seen? Did she see her sister go into captivity with Assyria? That's 722. We're looking at 586 coming up in here in Ezekiel's teaching, and when Jerusalem will be destroyed with fire. And so she saw this, but she was more corrupt in her doting than she, going after her lovers, paying them instead of them paying her, which harlots usually had done. But and her whoredoms, which were more than the whoredoms of her sister. So she went out maybe more nations than did Assyria, than did northern kingdom do. And we see in verse 7, she bestowed her whoredoms upon them, the choicest men of Assyria, all of them. That's who Aholah did. That's what Samaria did. But God's people, where God's presence was, she was more corrupt, whether they went to more nations to find protection instead of turning to God and his righteousness. That could very well be. But she doted upon the Assyrians as well, but she also made a covenant with the Chaldeans. And backed out on that. She revolted against the Chaldeans, and that's when the besiegement takes place. So her whoredoms were more. So we're not going to look at all the little details, but it's very graphic about someone that should belong to God, and they're going after their lovers, playing the harlot and the lewdness and the horrible things that they were doing. But we see spiritual adultery. Of course, they were practicing paganism too with the physical adultery as well, like they're doing in Corinth. But the point is that it was spiritual adultery in the sense that they belonged to God. He was their husband, not only their God, but their husband. They had entered a covenant relationship like you do in marriage. They went against that covenant. They went after their lovers. And he describes that, of that taking place, and therefore they would be punished for all of that. And there again is the jealousy of God, and you could feel that when you're married and someone is not faithful to you. There's jealousy in the sense, there's hurt. It's something that's hard to get over with that, and people have difficulty in relationships when those things are violated. That's what they've done to God. God's always been faithful. And yet here he looks upon these people as betraying a covenant as a husband and wife relationship. And it just fires up the jealousy and the wrath of God that indeed he's going to bring upon these. He's done it to northern kingdom and the southern kingdom as well. So we see how worse she was. So what was ironic now about the two sisters' lovers? We see them introduced as Assyria We'll see them introduced as Babylon. So what was ironic about that? Those were that she was looking to Assyria for help. She made a covenant with the Chaldeans and revolted against that, as we saw in earlier chapters, in the days of Zedekiah. So what was going to happen? What's ironic about that?
The nations, in verse 29, they should all deal with the hatred. In other words, they went after the nations and they seduced the nations, but the nations turned right around and dealt with hatred.
That's a good, and they had hatred for them. That's a very good point, because that just rouses up the destruction they're going to do. They have the hatred. Verse 11, her sister Aholibah saw this, yet she was sore corrupt in her doings, and her whoredoms were more than the whoredoms of her sister. And she doted upon the Assyrians, governors, rulers, neighbors, clothed most gorgeously, horsemen riding upon horses, all of them desirable young men. And I saw that she was defiled. Both took one way. They went the way of Assyria. Verse 7, she bestowed her whoredom upon them, the choicest men of Assyria, all of them. That's the northern kingdom. And then we come to verse 23, the Babylonians and all the Chaldeans and Pekah and Shoah and Koah and all the Assyrians with them, desirable young men, governors, rulers of them, princes, men of renown, them riding upon horses, and they shall come against thee with weapons, chariots. Their lovers will turn against them. And as Joel said, with hatred and anger, and try to destroy them. And that's what we see. It's kind of ironic. The people you appeal to for a protection, Egypt was not going to help them, but they appealed to in order, because they looked at the kingdoms and saw their governors, saw their horses, saw that was the power. And yet, where's God's power? Where is their power as being God's people? It was in serving God. And they were turning from her husband unto these lovers, yet the lovers were turned upon them. And sometimes that's the way the world works. The people you thought loved you, the people are going to destroy you. And they do so with hatred. And that becomes important as well. We come to the latter part of chapter 23. I want us to see the sins that they were doing, not only idolatry, but I want to read it. Verse 36, and moreover unto me, son of man, wilt thou judge Aholah and Aholibah, then declare unto them their abominations? For they have committed adultery. Blood is in their hands. And with their idols they've committed adultery. And they have also caused their sons, whom they bear unto me, to pass through the fire unto them to be devoured. What's happening there? We think Old Testament Molech. We think here were idolatrous practices. And what were they doing? They were delivering their children on the fires to that god. They were killing their children and allow them to be devoured. Moreover, they've done this to me. They have defiled my sanctuary in the same day and have profaned my Sabbaths. They weren't following his law. They bring in their idolatrous practices into the grounds of the temple. And that's what they did. They slain their children. They had slain their children to their idols. So they killed their children to their idolatrous ways. Have we done that with abortion? And people don't want to talk about that. We want to have our freedom to do with our body as we want, and that's our culture. In fact, you're a very harsh, bigoted person if you don't allow the woman to have an abortion. But how is it extended in our time to the point? Well, we're not going up to the day of birth. You know, we've got people that say we can put them away. What happens if your daughter is raped and she's a teenager and she can't get across the lines to have an abortion? Then you're not kind. And that's when anything that God says is going to go out the window with people. And I'll tell you, my daughter's raped by that illegal immigrant. We'll have an abortion as quick as you can say it. you can. That's the mentality. That is a ground that's safe for people in our time. as we see the media, how they describe that. You're a horrible person, Billy Graham, if you believe that abortion is wrong. And as those who are leaders, and they begin to read the Bible, and they're trying to set forth about, people don't care about the Bible when it goes against their inconvenience. And that's the birth control. It's been in our country for a number of years. That's how we deal with birth control. And we don't control our desires. We just want to control our inconvenience. And that's a horrible thing. Protected life, innocent life is protected in the Bible. And that's the mother's womb. That's the mother's. And there's horrible circumstances, but we don't even go to what did God say about it. It's that this is therefore all abortion is okay to many people. But it's not. It's taking innocent life, and that's not killing, that's murder. And that's what people that don't care about the Bible, they don't even hear that anymore when you say that. Yes, sir. And I think studies that we've done this last week, evolution has caused that to think we're no more than a higher class animal. And what has happened, you believe what you want about the immigration situation that's taking place, but these people are coming over from prisons and from this, they don't value human life. And we say, well, how can anybody do that sort of thing? It's because they don't value human life. That's been ingrained into a younger generation society, and we're paying for it now in our culture, in our society. And we have to turn back to God and realize that innocent life is protected. And yet, here's God say He will commend capital punishment. And if you're against that, you ought to be against capital punishment. All killing is wrong. All killing is not wrong. There's lines that set that forth and into our teaching. And sometimes we kind of try to, and I've seen the religious leaders do this, that no, we love the homosexual. We just said their relationship is wrong. How dare you? I can have sex with a woman, my wife, and now here's two people want to have sex together, and you say that's wrong. How dare you do that? Well, what's their problem? Their problem is with God, and they don't want to hear what God has to say, about that. And so we kind of tap down the thing that what is homosexual? It's an abomination of God. That's an abomination before God. God hates the sin. And the sinner that is practicing that, he hates too. That's another subject, but the Bible teaches that. We're to hate evil. Well, who's doing the evil? That person is. What they're doing, I hate the evil, but we have to say, no, I love the sinner because what? God loved the world and gave His only begotten Son to save them. But we're trying to find a way to get out of a situation where they don't think we love. And no, we love everybody. I don't love their deeds. And to speak out against that is wrong. And here's God's people sacrificing their own children on the altars of idols. Blood is on their hands. And they were doing that. Notice how they dressed themselves up. You have sent for men that come from afar, whom a messenger was sent, and lo, they came, and for whom thou dost wash thyself, paint thine eyes, deck thyself with ornaments, and sit upon a stately bed, with a table prepared before it, whereunto thou wast set mine incense and mine oil. That part to be worship on Him in the temple. The voice of the multitude being at ease was with her, and with men of the common sort were brought drunkards from the wilderness. And they put bracelets upon the hands of them twain, and beautiful crowns upon their heads. There's their lewdness, there's their courting the nations of men and going about their idolatrous way. This that I've heard that was old in adulteries. Now will they play the harlot with her, and she with them. They're going to turn them off to each other, and that's what they did. And they went unto her, and they go into a harlot as they go, so they went unto Ohala and Oholibah, the lewd women. That's where my tent is. That's where my sanctuary is. They're lewd women. And righteous men, they shall judge them with the judgment of adulteresses and with the judgment of women that shed blood, because they are adulteresses and the blood is in their hands. For thus saith the Lord, I will bring up a company against them and will give them to be tossed to and fro and robbed. The company shall stone them with stones, dispatch them with the swords. They shall slay their sons and their daughters and burn up their houses with fire. What's that referring to? That's what's getting ready to happen to Jerusalem, where my tent is. That's my tent. And these two nations, Israel and Judah, northern kingdom, southern kingdom, they belong to him. He took them. He took them from Egypt. And we've seen that, and cared for them in the wilderness. And this is how they repay him. So verse 49. So it is a solemn ending of this chapter. They shall recompense their lewdness upon you. They shall recompense your lewdness upon you. You're going to pay for your sins, and they, your lovers, are turning against you, Chaldeans especially, with Jerusalem. And you shall bear the sins of your idols, and you shall know that I am the Lord Jehovah. The Lord Jehovah that men want to know is the grandfatherly type love. He's a loving grandfather. That's God. And yet over and over again, Ezekiel, God wants to be known by his judgments. You shall know I am the Lord. I am over all. And my name is Jehovah, the great I am. And you're not honoring me as your husband, as Jehovah. And that's what we're seeing. That's the Lord. And American Standard always has the word Jehovah. You'll have Lord a lot of times just capitalized. That when you see that in your newer translations, you know that's Jehovah. And what's interesting is that Jesus is Jehovah. He's the Lord. And we realize that his deity is there. But that will be coming down the road. So Judah is going to have a remnant. Jesus would come from that. So they're going to turn on them, and they will bring the destruction upon them. And you look at, why would God do that? Well, just read verses 36 through 42, which we've just done, and realize how wicked they had become. And when we make idols out of riches, our men, we start bowing our knee to others that are going to control us, it's always going to go downhill from that morally, with the sexual deviation that's taken place, and it destroys a nation of people from within. I remember back in the Cold War and the rulers of USSR at that time, we're not going to destroy you outwardly. They say, we'll destroy you inwardly, and they've done that. They've done that through propaganda, through getting a hold of children in a generation in their younger years, taking over the institutions of higher learning, the media, indoctrinating people with atheistic concepts. And what do we have now? We have young people going. Did you know, we look at the people in charge now, at one time they were hippies, all running around in college protesting against authority. Now they're ruling the country. So country in Rome did this. They corrupted from within. And then we see the outbreak of that. And that's what happened with God's people. As long as they came to serve God, he was going to be that which would uphold him against all the nations. And he constantly, I took you out of Egypt. I showed you who I am. But you're going to see by this destruction that I haven't gone away. I'm not dead. I'm the one, I didn't leave you. But you have violated your covenant with your lovers. Any comments you want to have before we go into chapter 24?
Jerry.
Uh-huh.
Through Moses in Deuteronomy 27:28, the people were warned from the very beginning before they went into the promised land that you're either going to be blessed or you're going to be cursed. And the curse is going to come from not doing what God tells them to do. that they're going to be like the other nations.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're seeing in Jeremiah and Ezekiel say. They fulfilled the curse part, not the blessing part.
Yeah, and I think when you read those, you'll see that I made a new covenant in Moab. Here's the point about Ebal, and they're speaking curses and that, how you be blessed. That was a way of taking that law from Mount Sinai. As they enter into the land, that was a very graphic way of reminding. It was both sides of that, wasn't it? And that's a good point to bring up. And what they did, they went the way of cursing, because they turned against God. And that was the thing that was brought to their attention. So he gave them plenty of opportunities to know what's ahead of them, and that became important. Any other comments? That's a good thing to remember. Okay, we entered into chapter 24, and so I ask you, what's important about the 9th year, the 10th month, and the 10th day of the month? What's important about that? Let's go to 2 Kings, the 25th chapter. And I think you can see it real quickly, and we'll come back and look at the context here. But that was a special time to remember, and it puts us in a part of understanding the time frame which Ezekiel is writing. Chapter 25 and verse 1 of 2 Kings, Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon, turned against the oath that he made before God, and he turned against those who he had made an oath to serve, the Babylonians. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his army, against Jerusalem, and encamped against it, and built their forts against it round about. So what military action was taken? It was common to nations destroying nations here. Besiegement. How long did it last? Let's read it. So the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. So it came to pass in the 9th year, of course that's toward the end of that year, but the 9th year, and for 2 years, we kind of round that off, for 2 years it was besiegement. So what was happening? They're building mounds. They're surrounding the city, not allowing people to come in or goods to come in or to leave. That they're wearing them down with their resources until they either give up or they die. And that's a horrible way of warfare, but it's effective. And they were able to mount their armory that they have to bring forth rocks, and they throw those things over catapults, and they could lay that out there. And if you're looking from the walls of the room, you're seeing all that take place. And there again, it was the beginning of the end of the nation you're trying to conquer. Now Jericho, they just marched around it once every day, and 7 times on the 7th day, and shouted, and the walls fell down. But warfare, that's from God. But warfare was that way of besiegement. And have we seen the catastrophe of the effects of not wind, but rain and floods? How that has ransacked through the southeastern part of the United States? Is that a catastrophe or what? And what are people lacking? Grocery store's gone. We don't have any food. We don't have any water. No electricity. How are we going to survive? Where are the people supposed to help us? Well, we're going to help neighbors helping neighbors. That's what they had to do at the beginning. They've been going through that over a week. And some of them haven't been found. Some of them haven't had help. Things are changing. They change slowly. But just with that type that's not an army coming in to destroy a nation. But there's a sense we can so quickly run out of food. We can so quickly run out of water. So what do? We hoard, don't we? And we're going to make sure we get our toilet paper. I don't know why you need toilet paper when you're not going to have food, but Go get them. We may go for the food. But how quickly those resources take place. What have we seen with people going on strike for 1 or 2 days? Those ships out there that can't be unloaded, all things kind of it's a catastrophe. And we're thinking, well, we're not going to have food and this and that, so we start hoarding. And then that wipes out the shelves. And now where are you going to get it now? Well, we can't unload the ships. All sorts of things can happen. And I think we've all seen how much we depend upon electricity for a lot of things that we do, pumping water in areas. And so that infrastructure, when it gets to be broken up in pieces, it's a catastrophe. Well, they kind of brought this on. This was their way of cutting the supplies, and that's why we find cannibalism taking place. That became something that you would bring comfort to your children. They won't go through that. But we'll kill them, and that could be our food till we die. That's how it got, and that's just reality, and that's warfare. But that's the important thing, and what we'll see is that he begins to speak about that's about to come. So that'll be, 9th year to the 11th year, Zedekiah's reign. You've got them, and we've already seen there was a moment where the Babylonians, because of Egypt was coming up, they departed. So they left. So it wasn't an idea they're there constantly. They left, but they indeed came back. Egypt's not going to help you. And they thought, well, that's going to happen because Babylonians are leaving. That's just window dressing. That's just looking at the smoke screen that's there, because God's going to bring them against them. So that's what we begin to see. So he takes the picture of a cauldron. Here's this iron kettle, or this kettle that he has here, and he speaks about this, and he says, the king of Babylon drew close unto Jerusalem this selfsame day, on that day, and uttered a parable unto the rebellious house, and saying to them, thus saith the Lord Jehovah, set on the cauldron, set it on, also pour water into it, gather the pieces thereof into it, even every good piece, the thigh and the shoulder, fill it with choice bones, take the choice of the flock, also a pile of wood for the bones under the cauldron, make it boil well, let the bones there be boiled in the midst of that. So what is this? We see the picture, thank you. We see the picture, and we see that there's meat, get your protein in there, get the bones, and they're there, you're going to boil it all with water, it's that cauldron, you set it on a fire. So let's look at that. That'd be great. But notice what he says. Wherefore, verse 6, woe to the bloody city, to the cauldron whose rust therein, and whose rust is not gone out of it. Take out of it piece after piece, no lot is fallen upon it. I get the thigh, and you get something else. That's mine. No, you're not going to be able to do that. Why? You're hungry. You're greedy. You'll get what you get, and you'll take what you want. You're not caring about anybody else. That's what we see a picture here. Her blood is in the midst of her, because she's killed innocent blood, even their children, killed innocent people. She set upon the bare rock. She poured it not upon the ground to cover it with dust. Leviticus 17, you were to cover that blood with dust. She's not doing that. She didn't care, on the rock. And doesn't care about what they've done. That it may cause wrath to come up to take vengeance, and I have set her blood upon the bare rock, that it should not be covered. Therefore thus says the Lord Jehovah, woe to the bloody city. I also make the pile great. Heap on the wood, make the fire hot, boil well the flesh, and make thick the broth, and let the bones be burned. And set it empty upon the coals thereof, that it may be hot, and the brass thereof may burn, and that the filthiness of it may be molten in it. Yet rust is indeed, the scum is their sins, and all the things that have done. The rust of it may be consumed. She hath wearied herself with toil, yet her great rust goeth not forth out of her. Her rust goeth not forth by fire. Her rust doth not go forth by fire. And thy filthiness is lewdness, because I have cleansed thee, and thou wast not cleansed. That rust is still there. It's boiling. But I made you my people, and you have not, the filthiness is still there. And so I caused my wrath. But we asked the question number 26, when would the cauldron be cleansed? When would Jehovah be satisfied? When Babylon's done its job, right? David? That's right. So with verse 14, here's the aftermath. I, Jehovah, have spoken it. It shall come to pass, and I will do it. I will not go back, nor will I spare it, neither will I repent. According to thy ways and according to thy doing shall they judge thee, saith the Lord Jehovah. So I have caused my wrath toward thee to rest, in verse 13. That's when it will end. And yet he pictures this darkened pot, rust with all their filthiness, that all that is going to be cleansed by fire. And then he will rest from that. Now, what do we see? I know our time is short. Who dear to Ezekiel does he lose now? His wife. Son of man, behold, I will take away from thee the desire of thine eyes with a stroke. Yet, what was he not to do? He was not to mourn over her like he normally would. You know, neighbors bring food, don't take their food. They're just there to help you go through your sorrow. Neither shall thy tears run down. Sigh, but not aloud. Make no mourning for the dead. Bind thy head tire upon thee. Put thy shoes upon thy feet. Cover not thy lips, because that's what people did. Take your shoes off, the head tire thee, and covering our lips, and it said, and don't you eat the bread of men. So I spake unto the people in the morning, and at even my wife died. And I did in the morning as I was commanded. Now that gets home, doesn't it? That was something dear to Ezekiel. Okay. And we'll just prepare ourselves. Our time is up. And what amazes me is that he's been giving signs, the cauldron, the eagles. He's been giving signs, and now Ezekiel is one. Ezekiel is one. He is a sign. And we'll see how that comes out in the latter part of this. And then question number 6, lesson number 6 is in the foyer, because this closes this section. All of a sudden, we're going to see the nations that God's going to judge. We'll talk about 7 of them. 2 of them are in detail. And we'll look at that. That fits very nicely. I'm doing this. Ezekiel, you're my final sign, and you're a sign to the people. And how close home that was. And we'll see how that applies to God and his people, Lord willing, next time. Thank you for being here in your comments.